You are listening to another segment of The Alex Lim Show. Joining us now in studio to talk about his book Catch 22 is world-renowned author Joseph Heller. Welcome to the show, Joe.
It's good to be here, Alex. I've never met you in person before today, but I've heard lots of great things about you. I'm just glad that I have the opportunity to be on your show today.
Well, it's always nice to meet a fan. And speaking of fans, Joe, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? For all the listeners out there that don't know that much about you.
Yeah, of course. Well, I'm a New York guy, born and raised in Coney Island in Brooklyn. My parents weren't particularly wealthy by any means. We didn't have much growing up, and the one thing that I remember I did have was the ability to write, and I loved to do it ever since I was a little kid. I think I even tried to send in a story to the New York Daily News when I was 11. They obviously didn't think too much about it, though, because I got rejected.
Well, it looks like that rejection did not have much of an effect on your career because you did write a couple of really good books when you got older, the most famous of which was Catch 22. Can you tell us a little something about the book?
It's interesting that you mentioned Catch 22. When I first started writing it, I had only intended for it to be a short story. Of course, over a period of time which I spent planning, I was able to add more substance to the plot. And it got to the point where I started to think, hey, maybe this could be a novel.
But it wasn't as simple as that, was it?
Absolutely not. When I was one third done with the book, I called up my agent at the time, and he began sending the novel to several publishers. And I think at that time I had not developed a sense of attachment to my work, and I think I felt like if no one out there was interested, that why should I finish it? And eventually, Simon and Schuster picked up the novel, and they actually gave me some money for it. And they also gave me a deadline for finishing the novel, which I missed by 4 to 5 years. But it was, but I think it was only after 8 years of thought did I really feel good enough about the novel in its entirety.
Can you tell us a little something about the plot?
Well, the finished novel talks about the wartime experiences of Army Air Corps Captain John Yossarian, and Yossarian is a little bit like you and I, in that he comes up with all these crazy ways of getting out of flying in combat missions in order to look out for his own butt. And of course, the military bureaucracy is always finding a way to make him stay. So I think it's interesting how anyone in my book accuses everyone else of being crazy, and I think that the whole society is nuts, and the real question that we should be asking is, what does a sane man do in an insane society?
That's very deep stuff, Joe.
I'm glad you feel that way, Alex. In fact, here's more food for thought for those of you out there reading my novel. Peace on Earth would mean the end of civilization as we know it. Let me repeat that again. Peace on Earth would mean the end of civilization as we know it.
And why would he say that?
Well, I just think that at the end of the day, our society is so accustomed to waging all these really terrible wars, and at this point, peace just seems like such a foreign concept to most.
Now, just before the book was published, you had originally intended to call it Catch 18?
Yeah, I sure did, but right before the publication, we had to change its name to Catch 22 to avoid confusion with another new novel by the name of I believe it was Mila 18.
And how were initial reviews of the book?
I would definitely say that they were very mixed. I think the Chicago Sun-Times called it the best American novel in years, which was a pretty big deal. But at the same time, you had other critics calling it disorganized, unreadable, and crass. So it really could have gone either way.
And from what I understand, the novel didn't sell very well when it was first released.
Well, not in the United States, at least. I think it only sold 30,000 copies in its first year, which is not something that obviously that's not very good. I think it's interesting though because way over there in Europe, I think it was Great Britain or something, where within the first week of its publication, the novel reached #1 on the bestseller lists. So that was something that was pretty cool. And I think things really started to pick up in the States only when people started to identify with the anti war sentiments that were in the novel.
What does the term catch-22 actually mean?
Well, in short, Catch-22 is kind of a buzzword for a dilemma with no easy way out. We see it in the novel when Yossarian wishes to be grounded from combat flight duty, and to be grounded, he must be officially declared to be insane, which in theory all pilots must be, because only an insane individual would volunteer to take on the missions because of the imminent danger. But to get the diagnosis, he must ask for it, and in doing so, shows that he has enough sanity to try to not fly missions, if that makes any sense.
I hear the United States Air Force Academy over in Colorado Springs actually uses the book to help prospective officers recognize the dehumanizing aspects of bureaucracy.
That is correct, yes.
That's got to be something that's pretty exciting for you.
It is, and it's interesting because what actually inspired me to write the novel was my own experiences in the military. I was a bombardier like Yossarian in the Second World War, although unlike Yossarian, I think I actually was a pretty good soldier.
Wow, I had no idea that you were in the military. That really is crazy. Could you talk about the time that you spent in the army?
Well, I was 19 years old. I think it was 1942 or something. Anyway, I decided to join the U.S. Army Air Corps, and 2 years later, I was sent to Italy, where I flew in over 60 combat missions. So that was something that was really exciting.
Uh, that must have been some experience. What was fighting in the war like?
The war was kind of fun in the beginning, and you had the feeling that you were part of something heroic and glorious and something that really was bigger than yourself. And when I got back from the war, I think that's when it really took off. I mean, I was glorified as a hero, and all these people were all like, man, you flew in over 60 missions. And I always tell them that the missions were largely milk runs for the most part.
Mark Bowden, the author of Black Hawk Down, says that your work really influenced his writing. In fact, we have the actual quote here. I think he says, Catch 22 undermines the whole heroic logic of World War II. It was really refreshing and interesting for me as a young man learning about modern history and literature to see how powerful a single writer could be in undermining the whole social mindset.
Did you really say that? Well, that's very flattering, and it's obviously a great thing to be inspiring other younger writers. But I think the whole intention of writing the novel was to show the world just how crazy and absurd war can sometimes be.
Okay, Joe. Well, we only have time for one more question before we have to let you go. Do you think you will ever produce another novel as good as Catch 22?
That's a really good question. I do not like to think that my best days as a writer are over, obviously, but at the same time, I think it's going to be extremely hard to duplicate the success that Catch 22 enjoyed.
All right. Thanks for the time, Joe. We really appreciate it.
You bet, Alex. Talk to you next time.